"I ain't worth a dime, sir, but I'll earn my keep," the settler cook said, her voice low with shame, until the rancher placed his hat in her hands, a silent promise of belonging. But can a woman who's known only hardship learn to believe she deserves his heart? The wind of the Montana plains howled like a coyote that night, sweeping dust across the empty road that led to Dust Creek Ranch. Elara Wren trudged along it, her boots cracked, her dress threadbare, and her hands clutched tight around a worn satchel that held everything she owned: an apron, a Bible, and a single wooden spoon. She had been walking since dawn, following the faint promise of work scrawled in an old newspaper clipping. Cook wanted room, board, and fair wage. Inquire at Dust Creek Ranch. By the time she reached the gate, the sun had fallen low, painting the sky the color of dying embers. Her breath came in gasps, her legs weak. She leaned against the post, whispering to herself, "Just one more step, Elara. Earn your keep, like always." But her body gave in before her will, did she collapsed onto the cold ground beside the corral. Callum Red found her there at dawn. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and quiet, the kind who spoke less than he thought and worked more than he should. Dust Creek Ranch had been his father's once, but since the old man's death, silence had become its truest resident. The cattle moved slower, the men left sooner. Callum had learned to do without company, until that morning when he saw her. She was pale, dust in her hair, lips cracked from thirst. He crouched beside her, tilting his hat back. "Ma'am?" No response. He lifted her gently lighter than a sack of feed and carried her to the bunkhouse porch. When she woke, the smell of coffee and biscuits met her nose. Callum sat nearby, polishing his spurs. She tried to rise, but her limbs trembled. "I can work," she rasped, voice dry as sandpaper. "Please, sir, I ain't worth a dime, but I'll earn my keep." Callum frowned, not unkindly. "Didn't say you weren't worth something." He slid a cup toward her. "Drink first. Talk later." She obeyed, sipping slowly. The warmth spread through her like mercy. Her eyes met his steady, gray, unreadable. "You the rancher?" He nodded once. "Callum Red." "Elara Wren," she said softly, clutching the cup. "I cook. I clean. I don't ask for charity." Something about the way she said it, sharp, defensive, made him pause. This was a woman who'd been turned away too many times. He rose, walking to the door, then stopped. From his head, he removed his hat, well worn and dusty, and set it gently on the table beside her. "Keep that on," he said. "The sun's rough out here. You'll need it if you're staying." Elara blinked, confusion softening into disbelief. "You're hiring me?" "Reckon I am," he said simply. "The kitchen's yours." Her throat tightened. For the first time in a long while, someone hadn't asked for proof, only faith. She pressed the brim of his hat to her chest. "Then I'll make you proud, Mr. Red." He gave the faintest smile. "Already am. If you've ever thought second chances don't come for folks like her, wait till you see what happens next." Morning sunlight spilled across the ranch kitchen, glinting off tin pots and the pale steam of rising dough. Elara Wren moved with quiet precision flour, dusting her sleeves, hair tied back beneath the brim of Callum's old hat. Her body ached from travel, but her hands remembered what hunger taught long ago: work first, think later. The men of Dust Creek Ranch filtered in one by one, filling the kitchen with the smell of leather and tobacco. They eyed her warily, as if a stray woman might unsettle the walls. "New cook, huh?" drawled one of them, a red-haired cowboy with a chipped tooth. "Hope she's better'n the last one. Fella nearly poisoned us." Elara didn't answer. She ladled thick gravy over biscuits, placed each plate in front of them, and went back for more without lifting her eyes. When the first bite silenced the table, she allowed herself the smallest breath of relief. One by one, spoons scraped plates clean. The redhead grunted approval. "Ain't bad, ma'am." "Ain't bad'll do," she replied. faint humor in her tone. From the doorway, Callum Red leaned against the frame, watching. His forearms were dusted with hay, his eyes unreadable under the brim of his hat. He noticed how she moved, careful but capable, her strength quiet as prayer. After breakfast, Elara scrubbed pots in the trough behind the kitchen. Callum approached, a shadow falling across the water. "You cook like someone who's done it her whole life," he said. She didn't look up. "Someone's always needed feedin'. Figure I'm good for that, at least." "You're good for more'n that." Her hands stilled. Compliments were dangerous things, they had teeth if you weren't careful. She forced a small laugh. "Maybe, but bread and silence keep folks from asking questions. I like that arrangement, fine." Callum nodded slowly, understanding more than she'd said. He'd lived by silence himself for years. By midday, she'd mended the larder shelves, swept the hall, and baked a second batch of biscuits, just to make the place smell alive again. The ranch hands returned from the fields, following that scent like bees to clover. "She's got magic in her hands," one of them murmured. Callum didn't disagree. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the cottonwoods, Elara sat on the porch steps with her apron folded neatly across her lap. The land stretched endless before her, wide, golden, and lonesome. She thought of the towns she'd passed through, of doors closed and whispers following behind. Dust Creek felt different, though. It breathed slower, kinder. Callum stepped out, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed her one. "You did good today." "I just did my job." "That's more'n most." For a while, they sat without speaking, watching the sky burn into twilight. When the first stars appeared, Elara whispered, "Never thought a place could be so quiet and still feel safe." Callum looked out over his land, voice low. "Sometimes quiet's the only way things start again." She smiled faintly, holding his hat tighter to her chest. And for the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel lonely. It felt like waiting. The next few days passed beneath the slow rhythm of Dust Creek Ranch roosters. Before dawn, the clang of pails at noon, and the low murmur of cattle at dusk. Elara Wren found herself moving through it all, as if she'd belonged there for years. The kitchen became her domain, the stove her confidant. Each morning, she rose before the men, starting fires and kneading dough by lamplight. Callum Red would sometimes appear in the doorway, just as the first scent of biscuits filled the air. He never said much, just tipped his hat, accepted his coffee, and lingered longer than a man who claimed to have no time for chatter. The men had grown used to her now. They called her Miss Elara, with a kind of half-respect, half-awe, especially after she'd saved their Sunday stew from burning by tossing in a handful of wild herbs she'd found by the creek. "Smells like my ma's kitchen," one of them had muttered, almost shy. Elara smiled but said nothing. Praise made her uneasy. It stirred up memories best left buried. One evening, Callum returned from the north pasture with his sleeve torn and a streak of blood across his forearm. Elara spotted it the moment he walked through the door. "You'll ruin that shirt if you don't wash it quickly," she said, grabbing a cloth. "It's nothin'. Barbed wire caught me." "Barbed wire doesn't mend itself," she countered, dipping the cloth into warm water and reaching for his arm before he could protest. The touch startled them both. His skin was warm beneath the dirt, his pulse steady but strong. He watched her in silence as she cleaned the wound, her brow furrowed, her movements practiced and gentle. "You've done this before," he said quietly. "Too many times." She didn't elaborate. He studied her face, the faint lines around her eyes, the weary grace in the way she stood. There was strength in her stillness, a kind born not of comfort but endurance. When she finished, she tied a strip of linen around his arm. "There, try not to tear it open again." He nodded. "You're bossy for a cook." "I've had to be." Her lips quivered into a half-smile. That night, as Elara washed dishes alone, she caught sight of Callum outside through the window. He stood near the barn, head tilted slightly toward the stars, His expression softened in a way she hadn't seen before. Something about him, his quietness, his steadiness, pulled at her chest in a way she couldn't name. He turned and saw her watching. Neither moved for a long moment. Then, with a small nod, he walked back toward the house. Elara dried her hands, heart thudding softly. She didn't understand what was changing, only that Dust Creek no longer felt like a stop along the way. It was starting to feel like a place meant to hold her still. And Callum Red, whether he knew it or not, had begun to watch her not as a stranger, but as the heartbeat of his quiet ranch. The week brought early frost to Dust Creek Ranch. Every morning, Elara's breath puffed white as she hurried from kitchen to smokehouse, her hands chapped but sure. She had learned every rhythm of the place: the time Callum's horses drank, the hour the men returned from the range, the creak in the pantry floorboard that announced someone stealing biscuits before supper. That Thursday evening, she faced her first failure. The ranch hands were hungry, the wind had turned sharp, and she'd promised a hearty stew to warm their bones. But as she stirred the pot, she smelled the faint scorch of ruin. The stew had caught at the bottom just enough to carry the bitter edge of smoke through the kitchen. Her stomach sank. The men were gathering already, laughter echoing from the porch. Elara tasted the broth, grimaced, and set her jaw. "No one eats burnt food on my watch," she muttered. She dumped the pot, chopped onions till her eyes burned, and started over. Callum appeared at the doorway as the clock crept past 9. The other men had gone to bed, grumbling about the late meal. "You're still at it?" he asked quietly. "I ruined it," she admitted without looking up. "It's my job to fix it." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. Her voice trembled, though her hands didn't. "You gave me work when nobody else would. I won't let you down." He studied her, the small, fierce woman, bent over a pot, lit by a single oil lamp, the lines of exhaustion etched deep on her face. There was a stubborn grace in her, something that both humbled and unsettled him. He crossed the room and leaned against the counter. "You don't owe me more than your best, Elara. That's all I ever ask." She smiled faintly. "Then I'll make sure it's better than good." When the second stew finally simmered to perfection, the air filled with the rich scent of beef and thyme, Callum ladled a bowl, took one taste, and nodded. "Worth the wait." Her shoulders slumped, half from relief, half from fatigue. "You sure? I can try again tomorrow." "You'll do it again tomorrow," he said gently, "because that's who you are, not because you have to." He left her to clean up, but when dawn came, he found her asleep by the hearth, apron still on, hands folded in her lap. The empty pot sat beside her, washed and polished. Callum crouched beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. The firelight danced over her features, soft, tired, proud. Under his breath, he whispered, "You already done more than enough." She stirred slightly, murmuring, "I'll do better tomorrow." Callum smiled, the sound catching somewhere between sorrow and admiration. He laid a blanket over her shoulders before stepping outside into the quiet dawn. The ranch had felt hollow for years, but that morning, as smoke curled from the kitchen chimney, Dust Creek seemed alive again, because one weary cook refused to give anything less than her whole heart. Winter crept over Dust Creek Ranch, turning the mornings brittle and white. Frost rimed the fence posts, and the cattle's breath rose like smoke in the cold. Elara Wren had been at the ranch nearly a month now. She'd mended the kitchen, the bunkhouse menu, and though she didn't know it, the silence that had once wrapped itself around Callum Red's life. The men depended on her now. Every morning, they waited for her biscuits before heading out. Each plate met with a, "Thank you, ma'am," muttered through steaming mouths. She worked hard to keep it that way, steady, unseen, indispensable. But peace was a fragile thing, and gossip, like frost, could slip in under any door. That morning, while Elara scrubbed the flower table clean, she overheard voices outside the window. 2 ranch hands, Reed and Marlowe, leaned by the trough, whispering between sips of coffee. Can't say I trust her, Reed muttered. Shows up half dead, don't say where she's from. Women like that bring trouble. Marlowe shrugged. Maybe so. But trouble ain't cooked this good before. They both laughed. The sound twisted in Ilara's gut. She froze, rag in hand, staring at the sunlight spilling through the window. That tone, mocking, careless, was too familiar. She'd heard it before in another town, when her name had been followed by words that burned hotter than any brand. That evening, when Callum came in for supper, he found her quieter than usual. She moved like a shadow through the kitchen, eyes down, words clipped. He noticed. Something wrong with the food? No, sir. Then, what's eaten you? Just tired. He didn't believe it, but he didn't press. Callum had learned that folks spoke when they were ready, or not at all. Later that night, as he walked past the barn, he heard raised voices. Reed again, drunk and mean. Don't think I don't know your kind, he slurred. Fancy manners. Running from something. Maybe a husband. Maybe worse. Callum's boots hit the ground before the man could finish. He stepped between them, voice sharp as a whip. That's enough. Reed staggered back. I was just talking. Then talk to the horses next time, Callum growled. You're done for the night. When the man slunk off, Callum turned to Ilara. Her shoulders were squared, but her eyes shimmered with something she fought hard to hide. Don't pay him mind, Callum said gently. It's not him, she whispered. It's that he's right. I am running from something. He met her gaze, calm and steady. Don't matter what's behind you. What matters is where you stopped running. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. You don't know what you're saying, Mr. Red. I reckon I do, he said softly. Everyone's got ghosts. It just depends on whether you let 'em eat your supper with you. She laughed a broken, grateful sound. That night, as she stirred one last pot of stew, Ilara realized something she hadn't in years. Dust Creek wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was where her secrets were beginning to lose their power. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky above Dust Creek was pale and open. The next it was heavy with clouds as dark as coal. By sundown, thunder rolled across the plains, and wind tore at the shutters like claws. Ilara Wren bolted the kitchen door and fed the fire with split pine, its flames snapping bright against the gloom. She wasn't afraid of storms, she'd seen worse on the road. But something about the way the thunder echoed through the valley made her hands tremble. Outside, Callum Red wrestled the barn doors shut, rain slicking his coat and hair. When he finally stepped inside, soaked to the bone, he found Ilara kneeling by the hearth, trying to keep the flame alive. Roof's holdin', he said, voice rough from the cold. But the east fence won't stand another night like this. She looked up, startled. You shouldn't be out there in that weather. I could say the same, he replied with a faint smile. He hung his coat by the door, then crouched near the fire beside her. The air between them hummed with unspoken things, fear, gratitude, the quiet comfort of not being alone. For a long moment they sat without speaking, the storm roaring beyond the walls. Then Ilara whispered, I don't like thunder. Callum's brow furrowed. Why's that? She stared into the flames. It reminds me of the night I left my husband. He was a drinker, mean as a rattler when the bottle ran dry. That night, he said I wasn't worth a dime and proved it with his fists. I waited till the rain covered the sound of my steps. I walked until I couldn't feel my feet. Her voice cracked and she pressed her hands together, as though afraid of what she'd let slip. I ain't told that to anyone since. Callum's chest tightened. He didn't speak right away. He simply reached for another log, fed it into the fire, and let the warmth grow. You were right to walk, he said at last. And you've been earning your worth every day since. She gave a weak laugh. You're kind to say that, but you don't know all of me, Callum Red. He turned toward her, his eyes soft but steady. I don't need to. I see enough right here. Silence settled again. gentler this time. The storm raged on, but inside, the firelight flickered across their faces, warming the space that had once felt hollow. After a while, Ilara leaned back, exhaustion in her gaze. "Have you ever lost someone, Callum?" He hesitated. "My wife. 5 years now. I thought the storm that night would take me too." Their eyes met, sorrow recognizing sorrow. "Maybe storms don't come to break us," Ilara whispered. "Maybe they come to wash the dust off what's still left." Callum smiled faintly. "Then let it rain." They sat that way until the thunder softened and the fire burned low, two souls no longer running from their pasts, but warming in the quiet mercy of each other's truth. By the time the storm passed, Dust Creek Ranch gleamed under a washed blue sky. The earth smelled new, and the air carried that rare calm that comes after chaos. Ilara Wren moved about the kitchen humming softly, the tune quiet but steady. Callum Red heard her from the porch and paused. That sound, her voice, unguarded and alive, was something he'd begun to depend on more than the morning coffee. The peace broke before noon. A lone rider appeared on the ridge, his dark coat flapping in the wind, hat pulled low. The ranch dogs barked until Callum stepped out into the yard. The man dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the damp earth. His smile was pleasant, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon," he said. "Name's Warren Pike. Looking for a woman who has been traveling alone, calls herself Ilara Wren." Callum's jaw tightened. "What's your business with her?" "Personal." Pike brushed a fleck of mud off his sleeve. "She's been running from her husband's debts, far as I hear. Took off without settling accounts. That's against the law, where I come from." Callum didn't move. "This ain't where you come from." The man chuckled low. "You got a soft spot for strays, mister? Dangerous habits in these parts." From the kitchen window, Ilara froze. The voice outside struck like lightning through her chest. Warren Pike, her husband's old partner. The man who'd lent money, taken favors, and spread lies when she'd refused to repay him in kind. She backed away from the window, heart pounding. The door creaked. "Ilara," Callum said, voice even. "You know this man?" She stepped outside slowly, pale but upright. "I know him, and I know what kind of poison follows wherever he rides." Pike tipped his hat mockingly. "Always had a sharp tongue, Miss Wren. Didn't your husband teach you better manners?" Callum took one step forward. "That's enough." The tension in the air was a drawn gun. Pike's grin faltered under Callum's stare, steady, cold, the kind that had settled many disputes without a single bullet fired. "Best you leave," Callum said quietly. "Ain't no debt worth crossing me for." Pike's smirk returned, brittle this time. "You'll regret harboring her. She's bad luck." "Maybe," Callum said, his voice like gravel. "But she's mine to reckon with now." For a long second, the man looked between them. Ilara, standing small but unbroken. Callum like an unmoving wall, and realized he wouldn't win that day. With a sneer, he mounted his horse. "This ain't over." Callum watched him ride off until the dust settled. Only then did he turn to her. "You should have told me." "I didn't want trouble." "You think I'm afraid of trouble?" Her throat tightened. "You should be. Men like him don't stop." Callum stepped closer, his voice soft but fierce. "Then he'll find we don't run." For the first time, she couldn't meet his eyes, not out of fear, but because she felt something stronger stirring beneath the weight of protection he'd just given her. At Dust Creek Ranch, she had found safety. But now, that safety had a cost, and Callum Red had just claimed it as his own. The days after Warren Pike's visit passed under a heavy silence. Even the ranch hands sensed it, voices stayed low, boots softer on the porch boards. Dust Creek Ranch had weathered storms before, but this was different. The danger wasn't in the sky this time. It was on horseback, somewhere beyond the hills, waiting. Ilara Wren worked harder than ever, as though motion itself could quiet her fear. She cooked, scrubbed, and mended, but sleep eluded her. Every sound outside made her flinch: the cry of a night bird, the wind through the fence posts, the creak of saddles in the dark. Callum Red noticed. He saw the shadows under her eyes, the way she jumped at small noises, the way her humming, once a soft comfort, had gone silent. By the fourth morning, he'd had enough. He found her behind the barn, hanging linens to dry in the cold Sunday. "You've been avoiding me," he said, leaning on the post. "I've been working," she replied without turning. "Don't lie to me, Elara." His tone was firm but gentle, the kind that left no space for pretense. Her hands froze on the clothespin. "You shouldn't have stood up to Pike. He's the kind of man who bites back." Callum stepped closer, his shadow stretching across hers. "And you're the kind of woman who thinks she's alone when she ain't." She looked up then, eyes glistening. "I've spent most of my life learning what happens when folks decide I ain't worth keepin'. Better to walk first than be thrown out later." He took off his hat, rubbing the brim absently. "You think that's what I do? You'd be a fool not to. Men like you got reputations to keep. And I'm a woman with baggage heavier than a wagon load of coal." Callum didn't answer right away. He studied her face, the lines carved by hardship, the quiet fire still flickering in her gaze. Then he spoke slowly. "You keep talking like that, and you'll make me believe you ain't been watching this place come back to life since you got here. You're the reason Dust Creek feels like more than land again." Her breath hitched. "Don't say things you'll regret." "I don't regret much," he said simply, "but I'd sure regret letting you walk off this ranch thinking you're worth less than you are." The wind tugged at her skirt, carrying the scent of hay and smoke between them. Elara swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. "You don't know what you're asking for, Callum." He smiled faintly, a quiet that reached his eyes. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm telling you what's already true." For a long moment, neither moved. The laundry flapped between them like white flags of surrender. Finally, Elara stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have to fight my ghosts." "Maybe not," he said, slipping his hat back on. "But I'll stand beside you when they come." That evening, when she lit the kitchen lamp, her hands no longer trembled. For the first time since Pike's arrival, Dust Creek felt like a place she might actually belong, not because she'd earned it, but because someone finally believed she already did. The morning came sharp and still, the kind of morning when even the air seemed to hold its breath. Callum Red stood on the porch, rifle slung across his shoulder, scanning the horizon. He knew before he saw it, the dust cloud rising on the eastern trail meant only one thing: Warren Pike had returned. And this time, he wasn't alone. By the time the riders reached the gate, half the ranch was gathered near the corral. 2 lawmen rode beside Pike, their badges dull but visible. Pike wore that same crooked grin, though his eyes glittered with malice. "Mornin', Red," he called, dismounting. "Told you this wasn't over." Elara Wren stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was pale, but her back was straight. "Warren Pike," she said evenly, "you never could mind your own business." Pike tipped his hat mockingly. "Law says I'm mindin' it just fine. This woman went back east, fled her husband's estate, took what wasn't hers. I've got witnesses and papers to prove it." The lawmen shifted uncomfortably, but one spoke. "We just need to ask her a few questions, ma'am. Best if you come quiet." Callum stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "She ain't leaving this ranch without her say." "This ain't your concern," Pike snapped. "It is now," Callum said, eyes steady. "You show me proof she's guilty of anything but survivin', and maybe I'll listen. Till then, you can turn your horse around." Pike's face darkened. "You think you can stand between the law and justice?" "I can stand between a liar and a good woman," Callum said. The men tensed, hands hovering near their holsters. Dust swirled between them, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the whole valley held still. Then Elara's voice broke through, clear, trembling but strong. "Enough!" She stepped forward, standing between them. If it's me you want, I'll go. I won't have blood spilled over my mistakes. Callum's jaw tightened. You don't owe him nothing. I owe you my peace, she said softly. And if leaving keeps it safe, then I'll pay that price. She turned to the lawman. You want the truth? My husband's dead. Pike here made sure of that when his debts turned ugly. He blamed me for covering his name. Those are the papers he carries, lies signed by fear. Pike lunged toward her, but Callum's hand was faster. His rifle lifted, not aimed, just certain. That's far enough. The lawmen looked at one another. One dismounted, took the crumpled papers from Pike's coat, and read in silence. These signatures are forged, he said flatly. We're done here. Pike's expression curdled into rage. You'll regret crossing me, Red. Maybe, Callum said. But not today. The men rode off, and the ranch fell quiet again. Elara stood rooted, hands shaking. You shouldn't have done that. I'd do it again, Callum replied. You made your choice once to run. Maybe it's time you make another, to stay. Her tears fell, not from fear, but release. She nodded slowly, the weight lifting at last. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, Dust Creek Ranch felt whole again, because the woman who'd once run from her past had finally chosen where she belonged. Spring came late to Dust Creek Ranch, but when it did, it came in full bloom. The cottonwoods turned green again, the pastures filled with wildflowers, and laughter returned to the air like it had simply been waiting for permission. Elara Wren stood by the open kitchen window, apron dusted with flour, humming softly as the scent of baking bread drifted out to the yard. The men were working the fence line, their laughter rising over the sound of hammers, and near the corral, Callum Red was sanding a new porch post, one he'd built himself after the old one cracked in the winter wind. Every few moments he'd glance toward the house, catching sight of her silhouette in the window. It was a habit now, one he didn't try to break. When she stepped outside with a basket of biscuits, the ranch hands cheered. Miss Elara's baking again, one called, grinning. She laughed, the sound light and easy, and passed the basket around before heading toward Callum. You feed them too much, he said, half teasing. They work hard, she replied, setting one biscuit in his palm. And they smile after every meal. That's more than I can say for you. He bit into it, pretending to ponder. You sayin' I'm ungrateful? I'm sayin' you're quiet, she said, meeting his eyes. But I've learned that's your way of sayin' everything. He smiled then, the kind that didn't need words. By late afternoon, the ranch gathered for the annual spring harvest supper, a tradition Callum had let fade after his wife's passing. But this year, Elara insisted. Tables were set under the cottonwoods, lamps flickering to life as twilight deepened. The townfolk arrived, bringing laughter and music. When someone asked for a song, all eyes turned to Elara. She shook her head at first, blushing, but Callum stepped forward and offered his hand. You sang through storms before, he said softly. Sing for peace now. She hesitated, then nodded. Standing beneath the wide Montana sky, she sang a simple tune, an old hymn about grace and homecoming. Her voice wove through the evening air like something sacred, and for the first time, Callum joined in. His deep baritone met hers, steady and sure. The crowd quieted, listening not just to the music, but to something deeper, the sound of two lives finding harmony after too much silence. When the song ended, Callum reached for his hat, the same one he'd given her that first day, worn and dusty but full of meaning. He set it gently on her head again. Guess it's yours proper now, he said. Her smile trembled. You mean that? I mean this, he murmured, taking her hand. You're home, Elara. Always were. It just took you a while to see it. The stars blinked awake above them, and for the first time in years, the house, the land, and the hearts within it all felt alive. Elara leaned against him, eyes shining. You gave me a home, Callum Red. He kissed her forehead. No, he said softly. You made one. If you believe love finds those who've stopped looking, don't miss what comes next.